There are different models for game. The one that I like to use these days, open, premise, which means making sure that she knows that it's a man-to-woman conversation. It does not necessarily mean showing interest or showing disinterest. It can be done either way. So you're not saying I'm interested in you, but you are saying if I'm interested in you, it will be in a man-to-woman way. Okay? So that's premise, and that usually goes along with a lot of attraction and teasing and that kind of stuff. Okay? Then you have evaluation, which back in the day you would have called qualification in like the old school models. The reason I changed it, by the way, from qualification to evaluation is because qualification got used for so many different things that it was ambiguous, right? Because there's qualifying the girl qualifying herself to you, you qualifying yourself to the girl, you deciding the girl has qualified for you. It's like, what the fuck? It's so much shit, right? So specifically the phase where you're letting the girl win you over is called evaluation. And in that evaluation, there's qualifying going on. Does that make sense? So that's the next phase is evaluation. So open, premise, evaluation. The next phase is narrative. And that's where you're building like a deep connection, being more romantic, deciding like what is the story between you and the girl. Right? Usually you don't need a lot of narrative in shorter interactions. Even for like a one-night stand, it can be a lot of premise, evaluation, and you're fine. Some narrative will help. Once you get into second and third dates, once you get into relationships, that kind of stuff, then the narrative starts to be a much bigger thing. Having some narrative, though, does help. And in particular, the narrative you do, so the narrative that you want is the narrative of you and her and what's the relationship. The narrative you should have, the story you should have, even at the very start, is the narrative of who you are. Like if she were to tell her friend about the hot guy she hooked up with, what cool things can she tell her friend? How can she justify logically the emotional decision she wants to make? Right? So that storyline is baked in. But that does tend to come more towards the end, and it becomes much more important when you talk about like the nature of a relationship. We talk about those couples that have like their meet cute story that they like to tell everybody of how they met, or like their cool shared experiences that like identify how good they are for each other. That's like narrative. And then close. And the close can be whatever. Close can be sex, close can be relationship. Close in a short interaction can be a number if that's the appropriate close, whatever it is. And you obviously can jump to the close as necessary. Typically, you want to have at least evaluation before a close, at least some level of evaluation before a close, because it makes sense. All right, so ideally, open, premise, evaluate, close is a pretty solid set. Less than that can work, but it's more dicey. And the dynamic you'd like to have, we talked about, someone mentioned attraction versus qualification, attraction versus evaluation, ratios and time and stuff like that. And unfortunately, I can't answer that question because there is no answer to it. Okay? There's no exact answer to how long should I be in attraction before I go to comfort, or how many attraction lines do I do before I go to comfort. I can give you rules of thumb, or I can give you ideas. Like an old school rule of thumb was like do 3 attraction lines, or as it was phrased back then, 3 negs, right? And then you can move to qualification, right? That's a rule of thumb, which if you want to follow it, you can. But I don't suggest following rules of thumb. I suggest understanding the game. You tease until your teases have had enough effect. Once your teases have had enough effect, you move on to the evaluation, right? When have your teases had enough effect? Well, when she's reacting to them is a good idea, right? If she's giggling, if she's touching you, if she's blushing, those kind of things are indicators that they're having an effect. Or a really good one is if she starts qualifying. The best way to know when to start going from attraction into qualification is when she starts it for you. When you don't have to say, you're cute, but beauty's common. What do you have going for you besides your looks, yada, yada, yada. You don't have to say that. Instead, you're like, do you even read? And she goes, what are you talking about? I'm really smart. I went to a good college and da-da-da-da, right? That's much better when you tease her or give her a hard time, right? Or you're like, oh my God, what is up with that outfit? I like it, but seriously, what the fuck? And she's like, I think it's good. I did this and this and da-da-da-da-da. And she's qualifying herself to you, okay? Or when she just starts qualifying at a random point because you've done a good job, right? So you ask a girl what she does for a living, and she says like, I'm a doctor. No, actually, I'm a resident in this kind of thing, and it's this and that, and I'm actually doing this thing and da-da-da. When she adds extra unnecessary information to clarify or alter your perception, she's qualifying to you, right? So the best time to start qualifying her is when she's already qualified a little, because you teased her, because you challenged her, and it came up organically. If it's not coming up organically, that's when you'll do an overt qualifier, perhaps. Or better yet, that's when you'll just tease or challenge a little bit harder, right? But that's when you make that transition. But here's a very, very important thing. And I don't say never very often, but you're never fully out of one phase and into another phase in game. It's a ratio. So it's not like you have the attraction phase where you're teasing, 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 and then you shift to the qualification phase where you're being really nice and letting her win you over and there's no more teasing. Okay? You keep teasing. It's just less. There's more of letting her win you over and less teasing, but they're still both present. And even at the start when you're teasing, you can do little things of checking for qualification, or if she overtly does qualify, you can pursue it a little bit. Right? You're never completely 100% in one phase or 100% in the other phase. Or even when you are in the qualification phase, you do push-pull qualifiers, right? So instead of being like, giving her like an overt compliment of like, oh, it's so cool that you do this and this and this, you might be like, oh, it's so cool that you do this. It's too bad you don't do this. That would have been really cool, but what you do is good, right? You still have that push-pull, right? Or maybe you fuck with her on it. She says something really impressive, like, oh, that's fucked up. You're trying way too hard. No, I'm just kidding. That's really cool, right? But you at least keep giving her some tease. You give her that emotional roller coaster. It's not super like flat. Make sense? So I hope that answers your question a little bit in terms of when you go from one to the other and the ratios and that kind of stuff.
Did you go back after that?
Did you go back?
Yeah.
So number one, by throwing in a tease during evaluation, is that going back, right? And so the reason why you would go back would be because you've lost the previous phase. So at any point in the interaction, this is going to sound like really redundant. At any point in the interaction, you are where you are, right? You are where you are. You have achieved the open, great. You move on to premise, right? Premise, attraction, whatever you want to call it. You've achieved that, you move on to evaluation. Let's say then you're in evaluation and you lose her attention. What phase are you in?
Interaction.
Open.
Oh, okay.
You lost her attention. You need to get her attention back. You need to you're back at the open. Now, if you open and she's giggling into you immediately and qualifies off what you say on the open, you're back in evaluation, right? But if you open and she's kind of like, she got distracted and you have to like get her attention again, you're back in that premise attraction phase until you get through it again and go back to evaluation, right? So typically in a good set, you will move forward and you won't have a lot of moves backward. But you could move backward temporarily. Especially, let's say there's a distraction or some girl comes in or interruption, you might lose the open and have to re-engage, right? And it's quite possible after you engage, you'll jump right back to where you were. It's possible. But you are where you are, right? If you've done too much evaluation, get to know you stuff, and been too easily won over, and you can sense the attraction going out of her eyes, well, now you're back in attraction because you lost it. I'll give you an addition to that model if you want to make it a little more interesting. Is assume that each of the cups that you're filling has a tiny little hole in the bottom, right? Yeah. And so if you don't address it for long enough, even if you had it filled before, it can start to go low, right? And the filling process is a lot faster than the draining process, but you do need to monitor them a little bit. You can't just assume that since it's been filled once, it's permanently full.
Yes.
Okay? But yeah, very good.
Can you list
Yeah.
the phases